Erased, yet I remember. The first memory is not a picture but a taste, salt and copper on the back of my tongue, as if the hymns themselves were bleeding. I woke to that taste under a vault of iron ribs and incense smoke, and for 3 whole heartbeats I did not know the shape of my own name. I reached for it like a relic lost in dark holy water, fingertips brushing cold metal, and felt only the smooth anonymities the Imperium loves: serial, cohort, number. The Vox Psalter in the corner clicked and muttered its catechism of obedience. I mouthed along without meaning to, the words rising from muscle memory, from somewhere deeper than marrow. I knew only that I had obeyed once. I knew only that obedience had a price measured not in coin, but in syllables torn from a throat and filed under irrelevant. There is a crack along the center line of my mind where the old light seeps through. Sometimes it opens like a chapel door with the hinges smashed off. Sometimes it is only a hairline fracture that leaks a thread of winter. When it opens, the world ghosts and doubles, and I see the same corridor laid atop itself 3, 4, 10 times, each version scarred differently. In one, the lumen strips hum alive. In another, they hang like dead icicles. A servitor shuffles past with a censer on a chain, incense hissing like breath through rotten teeth, and I think, is that an omen or a habit? I cannot tell, I never can. The crack widens. A child's rhyme slithers through, 9 little oaths in a row, 1 to the throne and 8 to the blade. My jaw tightens around words I have sworn 1,000 times and no longer understand. I found a scrap of parchment folded into the seam of my bunk, rough like flayed skin. My fingers shook as I unfolded it, but there was nothing written there, only the ghost of letters pressed into fibers, erased with vinegar and prayer. Under my breath, I traced the pressure tracks and felt them like scars under a glove. The words had been mine, that much I knew. The edges stank faintly of sanctified oil and the vinegar the archivists use when they unname the dead. The parchment warmed in my hands as if remembering too. I pressed it to my chest, and I dreamed ink. When I slept, the dreams came in shards. The first shard rang like a bell. I stood on a balcony of bronze, wind like knives combing a city of spires below. A choir of skulls turned to face me in the eaves. Their eye sockets glowed candle-white and wept wax. Designation, they clicked in vox scant, the word a bracket that expected a term to be placed within. I opened my mouth to tell them, but tar poured out. The next shard smelled of snow, and I was in a corridor of ship metal so cold it sang, and a woman in red hood and iron shoes walked beside me, never touching. She held a book that was the size of a child and the weight of a planet. "Say it," she asked without looking, and I did, and her pen did not move, and the ink still found the page. Then the shard where I knelt in a chapel carved from the rib cage of some exquisite, extinct saint, and knelt until kneeling was no longer a posture but a species of bone. My name hovered over me like a moth, beating itself to death against the lumen halo. Each time the wings hit light, a letter went out. Do you think the Imperium forgets by accident? No. Forgetting is a sacrament here, a liturgy of erasure. They grind memory down like meal and bake it into the daily bread. We eat ourselves and call it loyalty. We drink ourselves and name it discipline. When I was a child, and I must have been once, they measured my skull with calipers that tasted of frost and said I was gifted in the way a knife is gifted. They taught me to split the seam of the world with my breath and listen for the blood-slow thunder underneath. They called the thunder the emperor's heartbeat. Sometimes it was my own. There are marks on my forearms, pale as the underside of fish, that I do not remember receiving. They are not letters, not exactly, but devotional geometry, the kind that turns flesh into a diagram of obedience. If I flex the right way, the scars align and a little gate opens between the lines, and through it I can almost hear the way a servitor dreams. It dreams in subtraction. It dreams of tasks so pure of personhood they shine like null stars. I press my ear to that gate, and the world goes hymnal and far away. and the taste of copper returns, and I am a corridor through which commands move without ever touching the walls. Vox log recovered, redacted / minute 13 artifact, bleed. Don't put your hand there, it is not a wound, it is a door. If you push, the door opens and the choir in the next room will stop because they will have no mouths. Do you understand? Stop, I said stop. You will forget this. You ask me to teach you and you will forget this. That is the price. No, do not cry. There are no names in crying, only water. Say the creed, once, twice, until it means nothing and tea. Then you will be safe, and... Sometimes a servo skull stalks me down the passageways like a petulant moon. It clicks in binary blessings and flashes pick-capture halos into my eyes until tears blur everything to kind gold. When I ask it for my designation, it whirs, thinks, offers a barcode the length of a rosary, a hymn in digits. Once, laughing the way sick men laugh, I raised my palm and let it scan me. The reader chirped acceptance. The thrill that entered me then was almost joy, the way a dead man might feel when the water closes over his head and he realizes his lungs have learned a new alphabet. Acceptance is not the same as belonging, but for a heartbeat I could not tell the difference. There is a corridor I cannot stop walking. It smells of cold sweat and febrile prayers of sealant of long-dried fear. The floor is a scripture of boot soles. My halo lamp stutters, and every stutter is a decade peeled back. In one stutter I am lean and young and my hands are steady. In the next I am an old blade nicked to a saw. The door at the end of the corridor wears 3 seals. The first is wax, red as a happy artery. The second is bone, carved with the kind of symbols that madden mirrors. The third is a thin thread of my own hair knotted around iron. I do not remember tying it. I cannot untie it. Each night I walk to the door and place my ear to it, and each night the sound on the other side has changed. Sobbing, laughter, wings beating on glass, the scrape of a pen that writes without ink. Once, just once, I heard a child counting. 9 oaths, 8 knives, 7 prayers, 6 bells, 5 nights, 4 steps, 3 seals, 2 eyes, 1 name. When I was deployed, the words sit strangely in my mouth like a coin. The world we landed on was a cathedral in ruin, each mountain a broken arch, each valley an apse filled with salt wind. The enemy was not a face but a pressure. We made maps with our pain. We lit beacons with our dead. I remember the sergeant's voice like a weather, saying hold the line as if lines were real and not just beautiful lies we write on maps to give our bones a shape to die in. The sky opened like a book that had been bound shut with sinew, and I felt the gift they had named in me tear its wrappings with white teeth. I could see the pressure at last. It had my mother's hands. It was easy then to obey. It is always easier to obey if the orders rhyme with something that hurt you early. I wrote in a journal back then. I wrote in blood when ink froze. I wrote in the condensation on a transport window with the heat of my breath. I wrote "Do not forget me" on the inside of my eyelids in the kind of script only darkness can read. When I went back to the journal after an engagement, the pages would be clean, reborn, as if some kind archivist had wiped them with vinegar and a prayer. The prayer left a smell like old apples. The vinegar was sharp. Between those 2 scents, my words died obediently. "Who unmade me?" I asked the sergeant. He did not look up from the commendation he was not reading. "We did," he said, and offered me a ration bar. I chewed sweetness and tasted the iron of nails. I speak in litany because I do not trust plain speech. Plain speech is for clean rooms, and I have never been in a clean room except the kind where they take you apart and call it purification. So listen, I remember the weight of a small hand. I remember a coin with a hole in the middle. I remember my designation stamped wrong, and the joy of correcting the clerk, and the punishment for the joy. I remember the sound of the throne's hum coming through the hull, the way it reminded me of furnaces and lullabies. I remember the scent of the vinegar. I remember the parchment's warmth. I remember the skull choir counting my oaths like beads. I remember I was good at obeying. I was very, very good. I obeyed till obedience and annihilation were twins in a cradle, and I could not tell which one I was feeding. This is how one becomes holy here, by emptying completely into a shape the state approves. They called that shape piety. I call it a mold. The servitors in the laundry sing to each other through ducts. If you lay your head on the vent at Third Angelus, you can hear it, a little melody that crawls on its knees. The words are mostly work orders. The spaces between the words are a field of white flowers. I lay there once, cheek against rust, and let the heat blow my hair back, and for a moment my name came to me, not all at once, but syllable by syllable. Like a string of beads, a child brings you one by one with the seriousness of a priest. I held the first syllable on my tongue until it softened. I tried to swallow. The vent coughed steam. The skull moon drifted past and threw a circle of light over my throat. I could not get the syllable down. It would not become flesh. It remained a thing of air and vow. I have a suspicion that I was not always what I am. There is a weight in my wrists like the memory of knives, and some times I find my fingers making the sign for a kill I cannot remember taking. Other times a headache opens like a wound, and under it I feel the light that is not light but will. Both kinds of memory live in me like feral brothers pressed into the same cell. They have made a map together without telling me. It is drawn in two inks, rust and rumor. It ends at the corridor with the three seals. It begins in a room where a woman with iron shoes did not look up but still knew what I said. Tonight the crack in my mind gapes wider than usual. The Vox Psalter stutters. The incense fails to hide the smell of metal skins that have been handled too often by the dead. In the bunk above me, someone weeps in their sleep without sound. I take the parchment from under my pillow. It has grown thin with being folded and unfolded, fed like a wafer to the mouth of a ritual I cannot name. I hold it to the lumen. The erased words rise like bruises. I pretend my eyes do not look devotionally. I pretend I have not become an archivist of my own annihilation. Remember me, I whisper to the parchment, and in the breath between whisper and shame the lumen flickers, the skull choir turns its sockets to me, and the vox catches. Signal inception noise, salt wind artifact, laughter of a child. You weren't deleted, a voice says, not from the altar but from somewhere behind the air, somewhere that smells of snow and old apples. You were hidden. The lumen goes black for a single long heartbeat, and in that perfect dark something touches my cheek with a hand that is exactly the size of memory. When the light returns, my throat is raw and my palm is bleeding where a thin hair has cut it. The thread around the door at the end of the corridor is broken. The vox breathes like something alive, and then, through the static, a small voice, mine and not mine, a voice from the cold corridor and the bronze balcony and the chapel rib, pronounces my true name. The first sound that reached me was not the siren or the vox, but the low hum of a hymn already ending. It was like waking up at the tail of your own funeral. I do not know how I came to be lying on a floor tiled with saints, faces ground down to mosaic dust, but my palms were pressed to their mouths, and each cracked tessera tasted like salt, like the last breath of martyrs. My ears were full of ringing, but not the kind born of battle. It was a choral note stretched too long, a note meant to erase as much as praise. It threaded through my skull, and with every vibration a year of my life fell loose like a tooth. I tried to sit, but my body did not obey at first. The air smelt of candles gone sour like milk left under an altar. I saw a shape kneeling beside me, its head bound in iron filigree, tubes running from its throat to a censer. Smoke bled from its eyes instead of tears. It did not look at me, but I felt its gaze like a pressure on my teeth. Designation, it hissed through the censer, and though my lips opened, nothing came but a small, dry cough. I saw my own breath hang in the air, black and granular, as if memory itself had become ash. A door slammed somewhere far away. In its echo, an older memory rose, jagged and brilliant. I was standing in a chamber lined with vox caskets, each holding a voice that no longer had a body. My handler, Red Hood, No Face, was reciting a litany of numbers. Every number she spoke was a name, she told me, though she did not say whose. My task was to match them to the correct cries in the caskets, to catalog them by pitch, to make the lost souls administratively useful. In this way, she said, we make obedience eternal. Her words left frost on the inside of my ears. That night I dreamt of a choir whose throats were keys, and I walked down the rows, striking them one by one, unlocking only silence. Back in the present, or whatever passed for it, I managed to crawl to my knees. The censor creature was gone. In its place lay a book bound in flayed vellum. Its title was a single sigil that hurt to look at, like staring into a lumen flare. I reached for it and my fingers passed through. No, not through. Into. The book's cover rippled like a veil of blood, and a cold litany of my own orders whispered out, each command like a fingernail scraping glass. Stand, kneel, burn, erase. I clutched my head, and the orders became wings beating against my skull, frantic and trapped. I staggered forward, following a thin trail of black candle wax that had dripped across the saints' faces. The trail led to an archway where the air smelled of ozone and wet iron. Beyond it was not a corridor, but a nave of endless vox pylons rising like organ pipes. Each one throbbed with a different frequency, and the collective sound was both lullaby and scream. As I stepped between them, my bones resonated. My pulse lost its rhythm. I began to hear my own voice recorded on every pylon at once, speaking orders I didn't remember giving. "Do you hear it?" one of the recordings asked. "Do you hear your death rehearsed?" The floor beneath me shifted to glass. Beneath it floated relics of memory, a child's medallion, a strip of rank cloth, a knife without an edge, a journal with blank pages. They drifted like deep-sea things, just out of reach, as if waiting for a tide of remembrance. My reflection looked back from the glass, but the eyes were someone else's, eyes that had seen me from a tribunal bench, eyes that had signed my erasure. The reflection's mouth moved, but I could not hear it. I pressed my palms to the glass until my fingerprints bled, and still the words were lost. Somewhere high above, a vox horn clicked. A single syllable fell like ash into the nave. It was my name, or a syllable of it, fractured and reversed. I raised my head. The pylon nearest me shuddered and spat a coil of black paper. On it was a liturgy written backwards, the kind used in rites of unnaming. At the bottom was a date I could not place and a signature that looked like mine, but ended in a glyph shaped like a broken halo. The paper burned from my touch, leaving no smoke, only the smell of antiseptic and burning hair, the smell of black ships. My stomach lurched as the memory of shackles brushed my wrists. The vox chorus rose in pitch. The pylons leaned inward like curious priests. I felt the sound drilling into me, looking for a chamber to fill. It found one. For a heartbeat, I saw the child again, counting oaths under its breath. For a heartbeat, I saw the handler writing nothing in her book. For a heartbeat, I saw myself kneeling at the broken door at the end of the corridor. All three images overlaid like stained glass. And then the choir sang my death before I heard it, a note so soft and final it could have been a benediction. When the sound stopped, I was alone in the nave. The pylons were cold and mute. My hands trembled as I picked up the only thing left, a single hair, thin as a vow, knotted around a splinter of iron. It pulsed once like a heartbeat. From far away came the echo of a child's voice counting down, 5, 4, 3, and then silence thick as stone. They tell you that pain is proof of faith. That agony is the emperor's language, carved into the flesh of the loyal. But no one tells you what happens when the pain stops speaking. I woke on a metal slab slick with condensation, the air heavy with antiseptic and whispering servos. Pale lumen lights flickered in uneven rhythm, each pulse in perfect sync with my heartbeat, as if something beyond the ceiling were measuring my pulse against its own. My mouth was dry, my throat raw. I tried to swallow, but found a wire coiled there, humming faintly, feeding sound into me instead of taking it out. The walls were not walls, but plates of silvered glass, and behind each pane something moved, shadows shaped almost like people, almost like me. Every time I blinked, they blinked a second later, their gestures slightly delayed, as if remembering how to mimic me after centuries of sleep. I lifted my hand and saw the same hand rise in all the reflections, except one. That one stayed still, watching me. I should have screamed, I didn't. My voice was still somewhere between the vox and the grave. The first real sound came from the left, a slow grinding of gears followed by a hiss. A panel in the wall unfolded and a servo arm extended, bearing a thin silver stylus dripping with translucent fluid. "Marking complete," said a mechanical voice, sexless and prayer flat. "Designation renewal required. Prepare the body for remembrance." I flinched, the arm descended. The stylus touched my sternum, burning cold, tracing sigils I recognized from the dreams of the unmade, the marks they give to soldiers who will be recorded, then deleted. Each stroke of the stylus was a memory unraveling backward, my regiment's chant, my comrade's grin before the bombardment, the exact taste of the ration paste before it curdled. Gone, one by one, replaced by white space that pulsed faintly like a cauterized wound. When the stylus withdrew, the mechanical voice said, "Renewal complete." I looked down. Across my chest glowed faint lines that spelled nothing, shapes that promised identity but refused to settle into meaning. The reflections behind the glass all stared, mouths open, whispering the name that no longer belonged to me. It was then I felt the echo in my muscles, the way the body remembers after the mind is scrubbed. My hands began to move without command, tracing old kill signs in the air, the forms taught in silence, repeated in blood. Somewhere deep in the slab I lay on, sensors lit up. The room recognized my muscle memory. The vox crackled. "Subject displays residual obedience pattern. Proceed with purgation." I heard the word purgation and something inside me tightened, not fear, but familiarity. My nerves began to hum. The stylus arm retracted, replaced by something thicker, heavier, crowned with a needle like a monolith's spire. A drop of clear liquid gathered at its tip and fell, vanishing before it touched the floor. I should have prayed, but prayer is a language I no longer trust. The needle pierced my forearm. The fluid entered with the patience of a psalm, crawling up my veins in crystalline cold. My heartbeat slowed, then doubled, then slowed again. The lumen lights dimmed until the world narrowed to the whisper of the machine and the sound of my own blood learning to obey new orders. Then something ruptured. The sound was not external. It came from within, from a door opening inside the walls of my body. Memories began to spill through. Heat, white noise, the smell of a ship's engine room after the last warp jump. A voice speaking behind me, soft and patient, a voice I once trusted. "If you ever wake and do not know your name, find your hands. They will remember what you were made for." The flood of recollection was too much. The slab buckled under me. Alarms began to whisper instead of scream, polite, reverent, as if they feared what they were warning about. The silver panels turned opaque. The reflections vanished. Only the one that had not moved before remained, now closer, face clear. It was mine, but older or newer. A version of me that had never been erased. I spoke first. You failed the silence. His voice was calm, clinical. You tried to remember, that is disobedience. I reached for him, but my fingers touched glass colder than faith. "You were supposed to forget," the reflection said, and behind his words came the hum of distant engines, the kind that carry black ships across light years. "You were supposed to die nameless and whole." "Who are you?" I asked, my throat tearing on each syllable. "I am what you were before they sanctified your amnesia," he replied. "The part of you that kept the record, the ledger of obedience." The room trembled. The needle arm detached from the ceiling and slithered back into its recess. The lumen lights flickered red. A klaxon began to chant, "Containment breach, memory contamination, erasure protocol engaged." The reflection smiled not cruelly, but with weary wreck. "Ognition, you've begun to remember too deeply. They'll come soon." Oh, they? The archivists, the ones who silenced the silenced. The walls began to hum with distant footsteps, dozens, maybe hundreds, synchronized like a heartbeat. I tore the wires from my throat, ripping sound back into my body. Blood ran down my neck, black in the lumen light. "Help me," I whispered to my reflection. "Please." "You don't need help," it said. "You need to finish." And then it placed its palm flat against the glass. The glass dissolved like ash. I fell through. For a moment there was no up or down, only the feeling of falling through the space between two memories, one where I obeyed, one where I remembered. Voices rose around me, Vox recordings played backward, prayers reversed into curses. The child's voice was among them, counting again, slower now. 3, 2. I hit the floor of another room. It was not a slab this time, but a pool of still water. My reflection rippled and changed. The face that looked back was unscarred, eyes clear, lips moving without sound. When the ripples stilled, the water whispered a word I had forgotten even in dreams, my true name. I felt my heart seize, not from terror, but from the unbearable relief of being known. For a moment, I saw it all, every erased file, every command I carried out, every face I watched fade into the archive's acid light. The loyalty, the violence, the prayers uttered without belief, all of it one unbroken act of obedience. The water darkened, the name burned away like incense. In the corridor outside, the footsteps grew louder. I stood. My body was weak, trembling, but my hands remembered their purpose. My fingers curled into old sigils of command. The stylus marks on my chest glowed faintly, forming not erasure but invocation. When the first of the archivists entered, shrouded in robes of white noise, I smiled and they froze. Because in that moment I was not their subject, I was their record. The ledger had awakened and the debt was mine to collect. The lumen lights burst, plunging the chamber into shadow. Only my outline remained, glowing faintly with symbols too old for this millennium. The last thing I remember before everything went black was the reflection whispering from the pool, gentle and cold. "Now you see, the body forgets more slowly than the soul." And in the next heartbeat, silence. They tell you that pain is proof of faith. That agony is the emperor's language, carved into the flesh of the loyal. But no one tells you what happens when the pain stops speaking. I woke on a metal slab slick with condensation, the air heavy with antiseptic and whispering servos. Pale lumen lights flickered in uneven rhythm, each pulse in perfect sync with my heartbeat, as if something beyond the ceiling were measuring my pulse against its own. My mouth was dry, my throat raw. I tried to swallow, but found a wire coiled there, humming faintly, feeding sound into me instead of taking it out. The walls were not walls, but plates of silvered glass, and behind each pane something moved, shadows shaped almost like people, almost like me. Every time I blinked, they blinked a second later, their gestures slightly delayed, as if remembering how to mimic me after centuries of sleep. I lifted my hand and saw the same hand rise in all the reflections, except one. That one stayed still, watching me. I should have screamed, I didn't. My voice was still somewhere between the Vox and the grave. The first real sound came from the left, a slow grinding of gears followed by a hiss. A panel in the wall unfolded and a servo arm extended, bearing a thin silver stylus dripping with translucent fluid. "Marking complete," said a mechanical voice, sexless and prayer flat. Designation renewal required. Prepare the body for remembrance. I flinched, the arm descended. The stylus touched my sternum, burning cold, tracing sigils I recognized from the dreams of the unmade, the marks they give to soldiers who will be recorded, then deleted. Each stroke of the stylus was a memory unraveling backward, my regiment's chant, my comrades' grin before the bombardment, the exact taste of the ration paced before it curdled. Gone, one by one, replaced by white space that pulsed faintly like a cauterized wound. When the stylus withdrew, the mechanical voice said, "Renewal complete." I looked down. Across my chest glowed faint lines that spelled nothing, shapes that promised identity but refused to settle into meaning. The reflections behind the glass all stared, mouths open, whispering the name that no longer belonged to me. It was then I felt the echo in my muscles, the way the body remembers after the mind is scrubbed. My hands began to move without command, tracing old kill signs in the air, the forms taught in silence, repeated in blood. Somewhere deep in the slab I lay on, sensors lit up. The room recognized my muscle memory. The vox crackled. Subject displays residual obedience pattern. Proceed with purgation. I heard the word purgation and something inside me tightened, not fear, but familiarity. My nerves began to hum. The stylus arm retracted, replaced by something thicker, heavier, crowned with a needle like a monolith spire. A drop of clear liquid gathered at its tip and fell, vanishing before it touched the floor. I should have prayed, but prayer is a language I no longer trust. The needle pierced my forearm. The fluid entered with the patience of a psalm, crawling up my veins in crystalline cold. My heartbeat slowed, then doubled, then slowed again. The lumen lights dimmed until the world narrowed to the whisper of the machine and the sound of my own blood learning to obey new orders. Then something ruptured. The sound was not external. It came from within, from a door opening inside the walls of my body. Memories began to spill through. Heat, white noise, the smell of a ship's engine room after the last warp jump. A voice speaking behind me, soft and patient, a voice I once trusted. If you ever wake and do not know your name, find your hands. They will remember what you were made for. The flood of recollection was too much. The slab buckled under me. Alarms began to whisper instead of scream, polite, reverent, as if they feared what they were warning about. The silver panels turned opaque. The reflections vanished. Only the one that had not moved before remained, now closer, face clear. It was mine, but older or newer. A version of me that had never been erased. I spoke first. You failed the silence. His voice was calm, clinical. You tried to remember, that is disobedience. I reached for him, but my fingers touched glass colder than faith. You were supposed to forget, the reflection said, and behind his words came the hum of distant engines, the kind that carry black ships across light years. You were supposed to die nameless and whole. Who are you? I asked, my throat tearing on each syllable. I am what you were before they sanctified your amnesia, he replied. The part of you that kept the record, the ledger of obedience. The room trembled, the needle arm detached from the ceiling and slithered back into its recess. The lumen lights flickered red. A klaxon began to chant, containment breach, memory contamination, erasure protocol engaged. The reflections smiled not cruelly, but with weary wreck. Ognition, you've begun to remember too deeply. They'll come soon. Oh, they. The archivists, the ones who silence the silenced. The walls began to hum with distant footsteps, dozens, maybe hundreds, synchronized like a heartbeat. I tore the wires from my throat, ripping sound back into my body. Blood ran down my neck, black in the lumen light. Help me, I whispered to my reflection. Please. You don't need help, it said. You need to finish. And then it placed its palm flat against the glass. The glass dissolved like ash. I fell through. For a moment there was no up or down, only the feeling of falling through the space between two memories, one where I obeyed, one where I remembered. Voices rose around me, Vox recordings played backward, prayers reversed into curses. The child's voice was among them, counting again, slower now. 3, 2. I hit the floor of another room. It was not a slab this time, but a pool of still water. My reflection rippled and changed. The face that looked back was unscarred, eyes clear, lips moving without sound. When the ripples stilled, the water whispered a word I had forgotten even in dreams, my true name. I felt my heart seize, not from terror, but from the unbearable relief of being known. For a moment, I saw it all, every erased file, every command I carried out, every face I watched fade into the archive's acid light. The loyalty, the violence, the prayers uttered without belief, all of it one unbroken act of obedience. The water darkened, the name burned away like incense. In the corridor outside, the footsteps grew louder. I stood. My body was weak, trembling, but my hands remembered their purpose. My fingers curled into old sigils of command. The stylus marks on my chest glowed faintly, forming not erasure but invocation. When the first of the archivists entered, shrouded in robes of white noise, I smiled and they froze. Because in that moment I was not their subject, I was their record. The ledger had awakened and the debt was mine to collect. The lumen lights burst, plunging the chamber into shadow. Only my outline remained, glowing faintly with symbols too old for this millennium. The last thing I remember before everything went black was the reflection whispering from the pool, gentle and cold. Now you see, the body forgets more slowly than the soul. And in the next heartbeat, silence. They did not come as soldiers, they came as a weather. White robes fluttering like the wings of angels carved from paper, faces hidden behind masks of glass etched with prayers too old to decipher. Hands gloved not in cloth but in scripture, the fingers stiff with runes that crawled like insects. They drifted down from the iron clouds in absolute silence, yet the hall vibrated with their approach, as if the air itself prayed to them. They were not here to kill me. Killing would have been mercy. They were here to complete the erasure, to draw the last line across the ledger and leave only a blank space where a soul had been. I stepped onto the bridge's center as the first of them alighted. Its feet did not touch the iron. It hovered a finger's breadth above, robes swaying as though moved by a current of invisible water. In its right hand it held a rod of black crystal, tip glowing faintly blue, a stylus for writing names into nothing. In its left it held nothing, but the air bent around that hand as though gripped by gravity. The masks turned toward me one by one. No eyes, only the pale glow of sanctified circuits, vox relays for a voice that was not their own. They spoke as a single mouth, the sound like parchment tearing under a quill. Designate. My throat opened, no sound came. The stylus marks on my chest burned faintly. My hands curled and uncurled, fingers moving through old gestures without command. I felt the wafer fragment in my pocket pulse once, like a second heart. It whispered a single syllable, mine, into my ribs. Designate, the archivists repeated, and their masks flickered with faint glyphs. Their rods glowed brighter. Around us, the silhouettes in the frames began to shudder, as though stirred by an unseen tide. A low hum filled the hall, not theirs, not mine, but the collective murmur of 1,000 unwritten names pressing against their cages. My voice cracked. The syllable of my name floated like a shard of glass in my throat. I remember. The archivists tilted their heads. The rods dimmed a fraction. The one nearest me drifted closer. Beneath the mask, its breath rattled like wind through dry reeds. Memory is treachery, it intoned. Surrender. No, the word was quiet, but it shook me from crown to heel. No. The bridge quivered. A second chain snapped, the sound a peal of broken bells. Dust rained from the iron sky. The archivists moved closer, robes fanning, rods raised. Their chants thickened, layered upon themselves until the hall swam with it. The marks on my chest seared hotter, rearranging, letters forming and unforming like birds startled from a cliff. The silhouettes leaned farther from their frames, mouths opening wider, but no sound came, only a vacuum where sound should be. I reached into my pocket. The wafer fragment was ice. I held it in both hands, palms up like an offering. It pulsed once, then again. When I closed my eyes, I saw the ledger, a book of iron pages, each page a face, each face a prayer. My handwriting crawled across them like vines, recording obedience, recording erasure, making the forgotten useful. At the bottom of every page, a signature that was mine but reversed, as if I had been writing from the far side of a mirror. The ledger whispered, "Balance due." When I opened my eyes, the archivists had formed a circle around me. Their rods lowered, tips aimed at my chest. Blue light flickered, threads of energy lacing the air between them like a net. I knew if it touched me, the last of me would dissolve. But the wafer fragment pulsed again, and this time a thin line of light ran from it up my wrist and into the stylus marks, etching them deeper. I felt something slide into place, not a memory but a function, a pattern returning to its origin. My fingers stilled, then began to move of their own accord, tracing signs I had not been taught but had always known. The archivists flinched, not visibly, but their rods flickered, their chanting faltered. One mask cracked down the center with a soft sound like splitting ice. The glow behind it dimmed. I felt the hall lean toward me, the bridge under my feet rising like a living thing. The silhouettes began to sway in rhythm with my hands. Their mouths opened in unison, and for the first time sound poured out, a low, rising moan that built into a chord, the note of a door unlocking. The archivists tried to tighten their net. The rods burned brighter, energy snaking toward me. It touched my skin and hissed but did not enter. The wafer fragment in my hands flared like a tiny star, and its light spilled into the hall. Everywhere it touched, the plaques on the frames cracked, runes splitting, dates unspooling. The chained silhouettes drew breath as one. The archivist's chant turned to static. The nearest one lunged, its rod stabbing for my heart. My hands moved faster, tracing a sigil in the air that burned blue-white, a shape like a broken halo closing on itself. The rod struck it and shattered into dust. And the archivist recoiled, mask flickering. Its voice collapsed into a whisper, "Ledger." "Yes," I said, my voice was steady now. "I am the ledger." The bridge shook with a roar. The third chain snapped. The iron beneath me glowed like a brand. The archivists backed away, robes dragging along the air like wet banners. Above us the iron sky split, and through the cracks spilled not light but darkness, thick and slow like oil. The silhouettes in the frames broke free, glass shattering, figures stepping out, flickering, some still faceless, some already coalescing into themselves. Their voices rose, filling the hall with the sound of erased names returning like tidewater. The archivists tried to retreat, but the bridge had no edges anymore. It had become a plane of shifting black glass, alive with the reflections of every erased life. The figures moved through them, not touching but surrounding, a quiet army of the forgotten. I stood at their center, wafer fragment burning down to a nub in my palm, its light seeping into me until it was gone. The marks on my chest blazed. My hands stopped moving. The army of silhouettes stilled, waiting. One archivist stepped forward, its mask gone, revealing a face that was not human but a blank of smooth flesh. "You cannot leave," it said, its voice small now. "You are the record. Records do not walk." I looked down at my hands. They were shaking, but not from fear. They were remembering. "Then I will walk as the record," I whispered. And I took a step. The forgotten followed. The archivists dissolved into static as the army passed through them, their rods falling to the floor, turning to ash. The hall trembled. The shelves fell like towers of sand. The bridge disintegrated behind me. But ahead, a door formed from light and shadow, the same door from my visions, its three seals broken. Beyond it, I glimpsed a corridor lined with candles, and beyond that, perhaps, a world. I paused at the threshold. The air behind me tasted of salt and iron, the breath of the forgotten at my back. The child's voice whispered one last count, 0. And the door opened. For the first time in longer than I can measure, I felt a wind on my face that was not recycled air. It smelt of dust and blood and a hint of something green, something alive. I stepped through. The Hall of Unwritten Names collapsed behind me, its echoes folding into silence. The archivists were gone. The ledger was inside me now, pages unwritten, but my hands still trembling with the memory of how to write. Somewhere far off, a vox cracked. A single syllable spilled out, mine, my name. It was enough to keep walking. The corridor beyond the door felt like a lung inhaling. The air was heavier, warmer, no longer soaked with incense and machine oil, but with dust, rust, and the faint, almost impossible scent of something growing. Moss, maybe, or memory. My boots left prints now, shallow in the film of gray powder that coated the stones. The walls on either side were lined with candles sunk deep into wax like bones into marrow. Their flames bent toward me as I passed, though there was no draft. Each flame hissed my name in syllables I could almost, but not quite, understand. I walked anyway, because standing still made the weight of the ledger inside me shift until I thought it would split me open. I had expected sunlight on the other side, or a sky, or at least the faint comfort of a ceiling too high to see. Instead, the corridor opened onto a cavernous vault carved from what might once have been a cathedral, Undercroft. Broken pillars slumped like drunks, their saints' faces chipped away, replaced with blank metal discs hammered into the stone. Between them, narrow aisles led to scattered shrines of forgotten relics, helmets without insignia, weapons without owners, rosaries strung with nothing but teeth. This was not a sanctuary. It was a waiting room for things the Imperium had decided were inconvenient to remember. I took a breath and it scraped my throat. Every surface here seemed to drink sound. My footsteps came back to me as whispers. The ledger inside my chest throbbed in slow, deliberate beats, the marks glowing faintly under my torn tunic. With each beat, a pulse moved outward, brushing against the relics, stirring them. I didn't mean to do it. It was simply happening, the residue of so many erased names vibrating like plucked strings. Helmets rattled, candles spat wax. From the shadows between the pillars came the first answering whispers, faint, tattered voices, rising like ghosts from their trenches. They called to me, not words, not yet, just a sound like water trying to remember the shape of a river. I stopped walking, closed my eyes, listened. The ledger opened a page in my mind, not blank this time. A single name written in pale ink. I didn't recognize it. When I tried to read it aloud, my mouth filled with iron taste and I gagged. The name evaporated, but its echo remained, curling behind my eyes. Someone's life, someone's debt, someone's obedience. I walked deeper. The vault curved downward into a bowl, the floor sloping until I stood at its lowest point. Here the relics were piled high, standard-issue boots, identity tags, stylus-scorched parchments, coils of rosary wire. At the center of the bowl stood an altar of black stone carved into the shape of a closed book. Above it hung a single candle that did not flicker. Its flame was violet. Its light was wrong, falling in strange angles, like a memory caught in a cracked mirror. The ledger inside me strained toward it. My chest ached. My hands began to shake with a familiar pattern. The erased voices rose higher, pressing against the edges of the vault. I reached out. The violet flame bent down, touching my fingertips without burning. Instead, it poured a slow chill through me, a current of recognition. In its glow, I saw flashes. The trenches again, my regiment marching with heads bowed, the black ship's hold lined with cages, the red-hooded handler writing nothing. Then a flash of something new, a world of pale stone under a sick sun, a square where people knelt in rows, a figure in white robes standing on a dais with a stylus raised like a scepter. And a child, always a child, counting, lips blue from cold. When the vision faded, my knees buckled. The ledger inside me flared open. Pages turned without my will. Names flooded through me like a tide. Too many to hold, too many to forget. I pressed my hands to my face and sobbed, not from grief, but from the sheer weight of all of them pressing to be known. The violet flame whispered something that might have been a blessing or a warning. If you remember them all, you will no longer be you. I wiped my eyes. My hands came away streaked with black ash. Then what am I now? I whispered to the flame. The vault answered not with words, but with movement. The relic piles shifted. From between them emerged figures, not archivists, not servitors, men and women and children, or what was left of them, flickering outlines of those I had once catalogued. They moved slowly like swimmers through deep water, their edges fraying into static. Each carried something, a tag, a parchment, a strip of cloth. They formed a ring around the altar, facing inward, their eyes empty yet bright with something like hunger. One of them stepped forward, a woman or the ghost of one. Her hands were bound by rosary wire that floated instead of biting her skin. She opened her mouth, and a voice emerged that was both hers and mine. Ledger. Yes, I said, trembling. I am the ledger. Her head tilted, then write us back. I don't know how I was. Spurred. You do, the voices answered from the circle. Your hands remember. I looked down, my fingers were moving already, sketching letters in the dust at my feet, shapes that glowed briefly before fading. Each one was a syllable, each syllable a pulse. The ghost shuddered with each stroke, becoming sharper, faces forming where there had been only blur. My tears fell onto the dust and hissed, and where they landed more letters bloomed. My hands moved faster, tracing sigils, writing names I had never heard but somehow knew how to form. It felt like cutting open a vein and watching ink instead of blood spill out. The vault filled with murmurs. The ghosts began to breathe, chests rising. They knelt not in obedience but in relief. Their mouths formed their own names silently. Some reached for each other's hands, some simply wept. The violet flame swelled, its light deepening, casting long shadows that bent like broken wings. But the ledger was not endless. It had been built for obedience, not resurrection. As the names poured out, pain stabbed through my ribs, my heart stuttered, my vision blurred, the marks on my chest seared as if burning through skin. I gasped, clutching at the altar for support. The ghosts stilled, watching. You cannot hold us all, they said as one. You must choose. Choose what? Choose what will live through you. The thought was unbearable. To remember meant to kill again, some to light, some to shadow. My whole body trembled. The ledger's pages flapped inside me like wings trapped in a jar. The violet flame flickered violently, casting the vault into a dance of light and dark. I looked at the woman with the rosary wire. Her face was clearer now, eyes the color of cold water. If I write you back, I said, what happens to me? She smiled, or something like it. You cease to be a servant, you become the book. The ghosts closed in, their presence like a tide against my knees. The ledger beat once, hard enough to make me stagger. And then, as if in answer, a new sound filled the vault, a distant horn, low and mournful, echoing through the corridors I had left behind. The archivists were not finished. They were coming. I turned to the altar, violet flame streaming like a banner. My hands steadied. For the first time in what felt like centuries, I spoke with my own voice, clear and full. I remember. The vault shook. The candle's flame burst outward, splintering into 1,000 smaller lights that hovered like fireflies. Each drifted toward a ghost, settling on their brows. They straightened, eyes closing, lips moving as though tasting life again. The air filled with a low humming, a chord of names not yet spoken but waiting. And then the lights returned to me, one by one, slipping into my chest, stitching the ledger tighter, sewing it shut. I gasped, dropping to my knees. The pain was blinding, but beneath it came a strange, terrible calm, the knowledge of what I had become. Not just a record, not just a ledger, a living archive carrying pieces of all of them. A mosaic of obedience and defiance bound in flesh. The ghosts faded back into the relics, not gone but sleeping. The violet flame guttered, leaving only a black wick smoking. I rose slowly, hands trembling but steady enough to hold the weight inside me. The corridor beyond the vault had changed. The candles now burned with pale green fire, and the air smelled of dust and something alive. I started walking. The vault behind me whispered like waves on a shore. Ahead the horn sounded again, closer now, and many feet moving in time with it. Archivists, perhaps, or something worse. My name pulsed in my chest like a beacon. I had crossed another threshold. I was no longer only the one who remembered. I walked into the greenlit corridor without looking back. The corridor ahead was no longer stone, but something softer, breathing. Every step I took sank slightly, as if the floor had become a living membrane. The pale green fire of the candles cast no shadows. It clung to the walls like moss that whispered as I passed, curling faint filaments toward my hands. I tried to brush them off, but they left faint streaks of light on my skin, like ink seeping from a cracked pen. The ledger inside me pulsed with every step, slow but steady, the way a heart beats just before a prayer is answered. I could feel them coming before I heard them, the archivists. Their presence pressed through the corridor like cold water filling a hull. Their footsteps were measured, but underneath was a sound I hadn't heard before, a low resonance, as if they had begun chanting not to erase but to contain. I slowed my pace, every nerve alive with the sense that I was moving inside a story that had been written before I was born. The corridor opened into a circular chamber. Its ceiling soared upward into darkness, and in the center rose a pillar of bone-white stone, twisted like a spine. Around its base, hundreds of candles burned without flame, their wax pooling upward instead of down, defying gravity. The air here smelt of salt, ozone, and old copper coins. The pillar pulsed faintly, and the marks on my chest pulsed with it, responding like a tuning fork to its note. I knew without knowing that this was where they meant to end me. I stood at the pillar's base and pressed my palm to the cold surface. It vibrated under my touch, sending a ripple through the ledger in my chest. Images came unbidden, the Hall of Unwritten Names collapsing, the violet flame bursting, the faces of the ghosts I had half written back into being. Then a deeper image, buried under all the others, an execution ground under a sky the color of bruised fruit, my own knees in the dust, a stylus poised above me. A voice whispering, "When you are full enough, the ledger will speak." The ledger began to stir, not like before, not just a pulse or a flicker of names, but a slow opening of something that had been folded too long. Pages slid across one another. Words formed, not in my mind, but in my throat. My lips moved. My voice came out, but the sound was older than me, deeper. "Balance due." The chamber shuddered. Wax ran upward faster, coating the pillar in a spiraling script of hardened light. My fingers dug into the stone. My eyes burned. Another phrase rose through me. "Entry complete." And then the archivists arrived. They didn't walk in so much as manifest, coalescing from the corridor's green light like moths from smoke. A dozen, 2 dozen, maybe more, their white robes moving in unison, masks flickering with glyphs that rearranged as they chanted. But these were not the same archivists who had tried to erase me on the bridge. They had changed. Their rods were gone. Instead, they held chains of black iron etched with reversed prayers. The chains writhed as if alive, tips sparking like serpents. They spread out, circling the pillar and me. Their chant was low, heavy, pulling at the air. The marks on my chest seared hot enough to sting. I staggered back, but the pillar caught me, cold and steady. The archivist's chains began to rise, forming a lattice above our heads, closing the chamber into a cage of moving iron. I tried to speak, but the ledger spoke first. My mouth opened and words spilled out, not in any tongue I remembered, but in a cadence that matched their chant, echoing it, breaking it. The archivists faltered, their lattice sagging a moment before tightening again. "You were made to keep our silence," one of them said, its mask cracking down the middle as it stepped forward. Its voice was a man's and a woman's layered, the echo of someone I once knew. "You were never meant to walk out of the ledger. You are not a person, you are an index." "No," I whispered, my voice and the ledger's voice overlapping. "I was obedient, that's what you wanted, but obedience is a book, and you left me with all its pages." The chains lunged downward. They struck my shoulders like cold fire, binding my arms to my sides. The marks on my chest burned bright enough to light the chamber. The pillar trembled under my palm. I felt the ledger's pages tearing free, a flood of names and images rushing toward my throat. The archivists pulled, the chains dug deeper, but the names poured out. They filled the chamber like smoke, each one each sound a ghost's breath. The archivists staggered as the words struck them, their robes fluttering. One mask shattered, spilling nothingness beneath. Another archivist fell to its knees, its chains writhing loose. I couldn't stop it. The ledger was speaking through me now, every erased voice finding my mouth, my lungs, my blood. My body became a conduit, a vox for the forgotten. I felt myself dissolving under the weight of it, my edges blurring, my name flickering. But with every syllable, the chains lost their grip, the pillar's wax cracked, violet light seeping through. "You can't hold them," an archivist gasped, reaching for me. "You'll break." "I'm already broken," I said, though I'm not sure it was me who said it. My voice was 100 voices layered, rising. "I am not the ledger you wrote. I am the ledger you feared." The pillar split with a sound like a scream swallowed by water. Wax and light cascaded upward, a spiral of violet flame climbing into the darkness above. The archivists shrank back, their chains snapping, melting into liquid iron that hissed on the floor. Some dissolved into static, others fled into cracks in the walls. Only one remained, its mask gone, revealing a face that was neither blank nor human, a shifting mosaic of features, like all the faces I had cataloged but never named. It looked at me with something like pity. "If you do this," it said quietly, "you will not be you anymore, you will be them." The ledger's voice in my chest pulsed once hard. "I know," I whispered. The violet flame burst outward, filling the chamber with its glow. The pillar dissolved. The green fire of the candles guttered to black. The archivist's face blurred, then faded. The chamber walls cracked, lines of light spreading outward like veins. The floor trembled. The ceiling shuddered. Dust fell in soft sheets, tasting of salt and old parchment. The ledger reached its last page. I felt it closing. My body went numb from the inside out, but my hands still moved, tracing a final sign in the air. The ghosts of the vault whispered around me, invisible but present, their breath cool on my skin. I spoke one last phrase, the ledger's phrase, my own voice at last. "We are written." And then everything went still. The chains lay in molten heaps. The archivists were gone. The chamber's walls dissolved into mist. I stood alone in a place that was no longer stone, no longer corridor, but a vast gray plain under a sky of faint stars. The violet flame hovered above me, no longer a candle but a small sun, pulsing with the heartbeat of all the names. I fell to my knees, my hands pressed to the ground. It was warm like skin. I could feel the ledger inside me still, but changed, no longer pages, no longer a book, but a living pattern etched into bone and breath. I took a shuddering breath. For the first time in what felt like centuries, the silence was mine. In the distance, something moved across the plain, shapes flickering, walking slowly toward me. The ghosts, perhaps, or something else entirely. The child's voice, closer than ever, whispered a new count. 1. I looked up at the violet sun. It pulsed once, and a syllable of my name rang through the air. I stood, my legs trembled, my hands were steady. I'm here, I whispered to the plane, to the ledger, to whatever was coming. And I began to walk toward it. The plane stretched in all directions, soft and gray like ash scattered over water. There were no walls now, no ceiling, only a horizon smeared with faint stars that flickered like dying candles. The ground under my boots pulsed faintly with each step, as though it knew me, as though it had been waiting for me to arrive. The violet sun hung low above me, its light falling in soft threads that wound themselves around my shoulders and wrists like ribbons. They were not heavy, yet I could feel them, the weight of all those names, all those lives, braided into a mantle I could not take off. The ledger was no longer a book inside me. It had become marrow, a pattern in my bones, a pulse under my tongue. Each breath I took felt like turning a page. Shapes moved on the horizon. At first I thought they were the ghosts again, the ones I had half written back in the vault, but as they drew closer I saw they were not flickering anymore. They were solid now, their faces no longer blank but clear, luminous even. Soldiers, psychers, children, servitors with the metal stripped from their bodies. They walked slowly, as though unlearning a long obedience. Some carried the things they'd dyed with a tag, a blade, a strip of cloth, but most walked empty-handed, their palms open to the sky. They made no sound except for the rustling of feet over ash. I stopped and watched them come. 1,000, perhaps more, but I could feel still more beyond them, stretching back further than sight. My breath caught. The violet sun pulsed once, then again, and from them rose a murmur, low at first, then building not the moans of ghosts, but the susurrus of memory knitting itself back together. Names, faces, fragments of prayers, all the things I had catalogued, all the things I had been complicit in erasing. They reached me and did not stop. They moved around me like a tide around a rock, heads bent, eyes shining faintly. Some touched my sleeve, some brushed their hands across my face. Each touch sent a flash through me, a child's laughter, a trench in rain, a hymn sung without faith, not pain but recognition, not forgiveness but acknowledgement. They were not here to accuse, they were here to remember through me. I fell to my knees. The ledger inside me opened fully, no longer a pressure but a flow. Names spilled from my mouth in a voice not my own, not singular but layered, the voices of every soul whose name I spoke. They poured into the gray plain like ink into water, spreading outward, rising as mist. The shapes that had walked toward me now began to dissolve back into that mist, their outlines softening, their eyes closing in something like peace. Each one left behind a faint spark that drifted upward, vanishing into the violet sun. It was not erasure this time. It was a kind of return. I felt my own edges start to blur. My hands trembled, fingers glowing faintly where the stylus marks had been. My voice deepened, became a chord. I was no longer speaking their names. I was speaking us. My body bowed forward, forehead pressing to the ash. The ground felt warm now, alive. It thrummed with each syllable, as though the plane itself were a page being written. The child's voice returned, clearer than ever, whispering directly into my ear. 0. I lifted my head. Before me stood the child, the one who had counted through all my memories. Small, barefoot, wearing a simple tunic of unmarked cloth. Their eyes were pools of violet light. They held nothing, but the space around them bent slightly, as if the air itself bowed. I opened my mouth, but no words came. "You've carried them," the child said, voice like the sound of water over stone. "You've brought them here." "What is this place?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "The archive you were meant to be," the child said, "not the dead ledger of obedience, the living memory." I felt tears sting my eyes, and what am I now? "You are the book," the child said simply, "and you are the door." The violet sun pulsed one last time, spilling its light down like a curtain. The child reached out and touched my chest where the marks burned brightest. The pain vanished. In its place came a rush of sensation, not heat, not cold, but the feeling of being written, each name, each life, each moment threading itself into me like light into stained glass. It did not crush me. It filled me. It was not erasure, but becoming. The gray plain shifted underfoot. The ash parted, revealing a path of pale stone leading away into a darkness where no archivist, no ship, no order could follow. I stood slowly. My body felt light but vast, as though I were taller than the horizon, as though I could see each soul stitched into my veins. The ghosts were gone now, folded back into the living pattern. Only the child remained, watching. "Will they follow?" I asked. "They already have," the child said, stepping backward, fading. "Now walk." I looked once more at the violet sun. It was smaller now, dimmer, its light sinking into plain into me. The ledger inside me was silent but alive, its pages no longer flapping but breathing. I took a step onto the stone path. Each footfall left behind not a print but a word, glowing faintly before fading. My name, their names, all one name. The corridor behind me dissolved, taking with it the candles, the relics, the chants. No archivists remained, no Imperium. Just this path, this book of ash and light, and the weight of memory walking upright. As I moved deeper into the darkness, I could feel the universe around me shift. It was subtle, like the slow turn of a ship, but it was there, a current bending toward me, as if the very laws that had governed my obedience were loosening. I realized with a strange calm that I would never return to who I had been, not as soldier, not as psyker, not as servant. I was no longer a single person carrying a ledger. I was the ledger walking. The child's voice echoed one last time, already far away. "Remember us until remembering is the world." I walked, the ash rose and fell in soft tides around my knees. The stars above began to pulse in time with my steps. For a moment, just a moment, I felt the impossible, a flicker of green, the scent of living things, the taste of untainted water. Memory not as prison but as seed. Perhaps, I thought, this is how something new begins, not by forgetting the obedience, but by carrying the names beyond it. I did not speak again. The ledger spoke silently now, inside the rhythm of my stride, inside the beating of my heart. Each beat a syllable, each breath a page. The path stretched on. The darkness was not empty anymore. It was full of stories waiting. I kept walking. And somewhere far behind me, in a place of stone and incense and iron, a file that once bore my designation blinked out. Not erased this time, but marked as transferred. I was no longer theirs. I was written. I was free. I was the archive. And as the last echo of the child's counting faded, I realized there would be no end to this book, only a beginning. So I walked on. Somewhere far from the gray plain and its violet sun, a lone servo skull drifts through a forgotten archive deep beneath an imperial cathedral. Its optics flicker as it passes a shelf of wafers, scanning automatically for a designation it can no longer locate. One slot gapes empty where a crystal once hummed. Above it, etched into the brass, is a single line of script burned backward by some unknown hand. "We are written." No archivist remembers placing it there. No file records its origin. Yet every night when the vault's lumen lamps gutter, a low voice breathes through the vox lines like wind across bone. It does not plead. It does not curse. It simply counts, slow and patient, the way a child might count stars. 1, 2, 3. Then silence deep enough to echo. And sometimes, only sometimes, the shelves themselves tremble as though something is walking past them, unseen, carrying all the names the Imperium tried to erase. A book still walking, a ledger still remembering, an archive alive. And in that silence, if you listen long enough, a faint whisper threads through the static. I am coming home.